Hello and welcome to the D
and A of Home Interiors, the podcast which is all about empowering you to make confident interior and furnishing decisions for your home. I'm Audrey, founder of Audrey Whelan Interior Design.
And I'm Deirdre, founder of youfurnish.com, such 100 plus furniture retailers on one website. The DNA of Home Interiors is proudly sponsored by checkatrade.com. If you need help with your next home improvement project, you can search from over 39,000 recommended, vetted and monitored trades on checkatrade.com.
So today, Deirdre and I are talking about the mistakes people make when improving their home. So I've seen lots of mistakes that other people have made. I must admit there's a few mistakes I've even made myself. And I've never asked Deirdre before what kind of mistakes she has made, but I'm dying to find that out. And, you know, we'll also be talking about how to minimize mistakes. So if it is that you're embarking on a project, what are the things that you can think about or allocate time to in advance to really reduce the risk of some of these things happening to you? So, Deirdre, I know you've been in your home a short number of years, let's say. So is there anything that you feel was a mistake when you were refurbishing it, furnishing it, or even just things that in hindsight you feel maybe you would have done differently?
I'd love to say it was perfect, but unfortunately it's not. And I have a number of things, I suppose, that I made mistakes with. Now, a lot of them, they're not big, but you notice them and you're probably the most harsh judge of your own space. So they just niggle at you. And it's one of those things, I think a lot of people as well, they live with them and then they get them fixed before they sell. And I'm just like, if you do have them, fix them sooner rather than later. And now that is advice that I don't actually practice myself. So I'll be honest there. So the few things that happened is there was a few things around sockets and actually lighting. So I put in some new lighting. I put in spotlights in the main area, the main room, because it was only up wall sockets that were upward facing, and I never felt like they gave enough light. It was amazing for mood lighting, but not for practical. Now, I was in the hardware shop and there was, I think, £20 lights, bulbs and £30 lights, bulbs. And I didn't know the difference. So I went with the £20. And it turns out the £30 ones were the dimmable ones. And of course, when you're using a space for multiple functions, having that flexibility to be able to dim them up and dim them down would have been amazing. So I'm really annoyed with myself that I didn't investigate and try to understand what the difference was. Of course, when I put in these new lights, I had to put in a new switch on the wall to turn them on and off. And I got a completely different socket than the existing ones. And if I describe it, the existing sockets are all sorts of matte. They're like a chrome matte. And this is a very bright sort of shiny chrome, a bit like a mirror nearly. So it stands out. It's completely wrong in contrast with what's there. And sticking on lights then, in my bedroom, I had a white socket with one of the dimmable switches, the little white knobs that you can turn. Now, one of them got broken, so I had to find a replacement, and there was two of the white knobs on this one socket. So I went into the hardware store and I got the second white switch. And of course, I brought it home. It's a different size. Who knew they even came in different sizes? So it's little things like that are just really frustrating, because I sort of look at that when I'm lying in bed and I can see it in the morning. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's a different size. And it's not a huge thing, but it's just sort of they're niggling at you. So they're probably the big ones, Audrey, other than, well, actually, I'm looking at one here, which is probably bigger. I have a feature wall which differentiates my dining space from the living area and also the kitchen. I measured out what I thought would be the area. So the painter came in and he asked me, where do you want this feature wall to end? Now, I didn't have any furniture at the time, so I did a bit of a guesstimation. I was like, oh, this point here, let's do it to here. That'll be loads of space. But actually, when I got the dining table in and realised that it needs to be centred for when you're pulling in and out the chairs, I needed an extra couple of inches on that feature wall. So we added a couple of inches on. And again, it was one of those things where I had to get somebody out to redo it. But there's there's a slight line. Now, you probably wouldn't notice it unless you're me, but I can still see where the original feature wall went to and then where the new extension is. So there's just little things like that where I'm like, I should have taken a little bit more time, did a little bit more planning before always rushing out and then not realizing that there is these differences and you need to measure up properly and really bring the examples out shopping with you when you're looking for these little switches and devices, because they're not all one measurement or all the same.
Yeah, I think you've hit on such an important point there, Deirdre, about time. So I find, when people talk to me about mistakes they've made or things that they wish they did differently, often, in the conversation, we start to realize it's because they were under pressure. So, in the example of your lights, I guess maybe, you were conscious you had an electrician there kind of waiting for the goods to be installed. And, you kind of, you receive, you buy these lights or you've ordered them and the delivery arrives. And then you realize, oh gosh, maybe I could have had dimmable ones, but you're kind of under that pressure. Tradespeople are there. They want to get the job done. And it's so easy kind of in that, heat of the moment to just go, oh, just put them in. But actually, you've then got to live with that decision, for most people, probably quite a number of years, versus, sort of saying, okay, it's going to cost me a bit extra, maybe a bit more time for the electrician to wait, till the next day, till I get the new ones or whatever it might be. But I think better than, delaying the trades and ordering again is to actually factor in some time before your project starts to look at the things that you do need to purchase, and like, for example, things like lights, run that past the electrician, see if there are other options, and kind of order then, once you feel you've done your research and sort of what that you're getting the best possible solution.
So I suppose, Audrey, when you were thinking about mistakes and what are the common things that people have, apart from, your switches and your lighting, I think it's quite a big one actually, isn't it though? Because my aunt recently built a house and I went into her living room when there was nothing in it. It was just like a concrete floor and she had one socket right in the middle of the floor. And I was like, well, that's ridiculous. Why do you have a socket in the middle of the floor? And she was like, oh, but that's where my couch is going to be because it's a big open plan area and I want to have a side table with a lamp beside my couch for when I'm reading at night. And I was like, oh, that's really smart, because most people are trying to put a cable under a rug so it's not a trip hazard. So you do need to think ahead of all of these things of how you're actually going to use the space. And I suppose having a switch next to your bed is always nice as well, so you don't have to get out and trip across whatever you've left on the floor. Not that anybody leaves anything on the floor, of course.
No, not in my house either. No, and yeah, it's so true what you're saying. And this is, part of that aspect of kind of having the time in advance to do the planning, and even to the point where, if you draw things out. So, I mean, if you've got an architect or a designer working on your project, then chances are, drawings will be part of that. But, if not, if you can, sort of spend a bit of time, learning that skill yourself or delegating to somebody who can help you. The example of your aunt's house and thinking ahead about that socket. I mean, that's much more likely to be thought about if you start to plan a furniture layout before you actually start the work on site. So for a lot of people, they say, oh, I don't need to think about my sofas or rugs or anything like that now. I can think about that later once the place is built. I know roughly I'll have some sort of sofa down this end and dining the other end. That's kind of as far as I thought. But when you draw things out, I think it really forces you to see the potential flaws ahead and to actually factor in that detailing kind of up front, so you can then see, well, actually the space would be great for a sofa kind of in the middle of the room that you can walk around, and lovely rug side table. But then as soon as you want some lighting in that kind of almost island in the middle of your room, you think, well, actually, how is that going to work? So you're much more likely to figure that out, I think, on a sort of a space plan drawing than just hypothetically in your head when you've got, a million and one decisions to make kind of simultaneously at the beginning of your project.
And talking of like planning out, what about measurements? Does that go wrong? And I'm sort of thinking of my parents bought a 3-seat settee package. And actually, when it came, we just about got it into the room, which was a struggle, but it was too big for the room. So like, to me, that would be a mistake. And it's one of those things that you go into these big warehouses and the sheds and you look at your furniture and you think, that's an amazing couch. I love it. I sit on it. It's comfortable. I'm buying it. I don't think about, is it going to be right for the room in terms of the spatial awareness of the room? So is this a common mistake that people make? You know, yes, I want a huge bed, but actually I've not left any room to walk up and down either side of it.
Yeah, no, it is. I think it happens to a lot of people because if you like, you know, there's the kind of more technical mistake perhaps of, you know, measuring incorrectly or something doesn't fit in and you thought it would. But then there's the other mistake like you're describing where sort of technically, yes, it fits in. It's, you know, it's in the room, you can sit on it, but it's more, you know, how it feels in the room is the issue. So I think that's where, you know, the advanced planning is really key, because if you just do sort of one length measurement along a wall and think, well, that's long enough for that sofa I've seen in the big warehouse or wherever, you know, that's not really taking into account, you know, the depth and then how much is left over and what else you might want to put around it. So I think it's really important to plan out the space with the other items that you're going to put in, even if that's not right now, but it's in time, so that you can really create, you know, that vision for the room overall.
Quick shout out for our sponsor, checkatrade.com. Search recommended tradespeople online with checkatrade.com.
So I struggle to imagine that you've made any mistakes, Audrey. What mistakes have you made in your home?
I can tell you a few. So, I mean, on the measurement front, I can admit to mismeasuring a roller blind a couple of times. So, you know, blinds sometimes can be, you know, there's a lot of decisions around them. Like, do they go inside the window recess or outside the recess? You know, things like this. And I would be ordering blinds from manufacturers, and it's so easy to write, you know, the wrong number in the wrong box, like it's going inside the recess rather than outside, and then it turns up and it's not doing the job that you had hoped. So, you know,
I'm terrible for inverting numbers.
Oh, so gosh,
it'll be 56 and I'll write down 65.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the lessons I learned very early on in my career, which was one of the first jobs I worked in, we had a very strict rule where they said, if you're in a house and you're measuring for curtains and blinds and the client wants to talk to you, you need to not engage. So you need to deal with this. So you either have the conversation and then you measure the blind separately, or you explain to the customer that while you're measuring the blind, you need to focus completely on that, because it is amazing how, that kind of thing about just inverting numbers or something when your brain is on two things at the one time. So easy to do. So the same just for somebody at home thinking, I'll quickly do this while I'm sort of, you know, on a phone call or God knows what, you know, good to just give it the proper focus. The other thing, number related, I've made a mistake on is actually ordering a fabric. So curtains that were being made, I wrote down the code like in an email to order the fabric, but the code of the fabric had one digit incorrect in it, unknown to me, because I had jotted it down off a website or a sample or something, and I typed it in not knowing one digit was incorrect. But actually it would have been good for me if that meant that there was no product available, but instead it ended up being in a different color to what I wanted, because that change in digit was actually a different product code. So it was the same pattern, but instead of being a really light soft grey, it was a blue, and it was just completely different in atmosphere, a really cold sort of blue. And it was for a client for a huge, like, Edwardian bay window. So anyway, it you know, you can be ordering fabrics and it can be going to, in my case, it was going to a curtain maker. You could be ordering fabric or signing off a document in a sofa company to have your custom made, or even just a sofa that you're specifying a fabric from their range for, and you're the one signing off the document. Now, even if that sales assistant maybe put the code wrong versus what you thought it was, it's so worth just double checking these things up front, because it can be, quite an expensive mistake to rectify later on.
Yeah, gosh. And so easily done, but...
Yeah, absolutely. Like human error rather than sort of lack of knowledge or expertise or anything, just literally, in a hurry or just not double checking something. So yeah, double, triple checking everything like that, I think, is never a waste of time.
Now, my next one, it's not necessarily that it's a mistake, but maybe you make a decision and then with hindsight you realize that you shouldn't have done that. And I think one of the things I was going to do is I was going to buy way too much furniture when I had sort of put in an offer and was waiting to exchange, and I had bookcases and sideboards and side tables and console tables, and my living room is not the length of a football pitch, so of course none of that would have actually fitted in there. But I can see how I could have quite quickly gone out and bought too much furniture, but because I sort of lived in the space and was busy with work, I didn't have time. And then living in the space, I realised actually I didn't need all this furniture. So is there things that with hindsight become mistakes, even though, it might not be a mistake in the sense of it's a wrong measurement or, it's a wrong switch?
Well, I would classify that sort of as the old expression, haste makes waste, so kind
haste makes waste.
Yeah.
I love that one.
So back in my days of like making furniture at university, that was a classic phrase where it was like, it's a bit like the measure twice, cut once expression. So, so rather
Two
than...
ears, one mouth.
Yes. So rather than jumping ahead and almost wanting to tick that done box on it, that you accept that it is a process and it should take some time and you'll be better for it, if you do take that time. So I think in the case of a new home, it's absolutely brilliant if you can live in it, or at the very least, the way some people see a property for like less than 15 minutes before they eventually move in months and months later, at least get to go back there more and measure up more, take more photos, kind of digest, the space. And then I would say, I'm a real believer in kind of building your vision for a space. So it sounds a bit like what you were doing, sort of accumulating the ideas. So there's no harm in having 10 bookcases on your shortlist. It doesn't mean you're going to buy them all. And, you're trying to get down to sort of your ideal combination of things that you would buy. But if you can live there and maybe just initially buy the essentials off that list, so maybe a sofa so you can sit down, and kind of start off then incrementally. I mean, you can still buy them in fairly quick succession, but especially if they're not all coming from the same place, there's no like massive advantage to kind of having all your deliveries arrive in one single day. So unless, you're used to planning space. I mean, lots of projects I work on, that is how they'll happen. But, there'll be 3D models of the space. Everything's worked out. Everything's agreed. There's a huge process, a huge amount of time that's gone into kind of working all that out. But I think, that would never happen professionally, where you just sort of take a gamble on a whole load of stuff and hope, that it just works. So I think, kind of little by little and not feeling like you've got to jump in the deep end straight away is probably the best advice.
Yeah, and talking to other people as well, because when you've never done a project or designed something, how would you know these things? So don't be too harsh on yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, learning from other people. Another thing I've seen done that people have regretted is actually wasted space in a kitchen around corner units, where I've actually seen like the corner unit where it's not actually accessible at all.
Yeah.
Or, it's way in at the back such that you never actually use it. So thinking around smart solutions for awkward nooks and crannies to really make the most out of the space.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that's something that can take a bit more time, a bit more research. But if you can, avail of some time and not kind of rush into it, then, chances are you will come up with a better kind of longer term solution. So that's good. I think there's just, for a long time now, there has been a real temptation in lots of areas of life to just kind of do everything super quick, almost like that's the, the big tick box. But I think, probably partly, well, people are becoming more environmentally conscious, and also just we've had such a life change in so many ways through this whole pandemic period. I think there is a little bit of a slowdown on that, and people are kind of, a lot of people I think are starting to see the value in just, taking a little bit more time and seeing that there isn't really any huge achievement to be gained by doing things super quick, and as a result kind of maybe risking then some of that successful outcome.
Yeah. Now, paint and walls are something that I'm quite intrigued with, because I know a lot of people that maybe have gone out and been very bland and just kept, I'm just going to go with white. What can we do to make sure that when we're picking paint colours that we're not being too conservative, but also that we're getting a proper sense of them? Because looking in the shop, and this was something I never realised, is that they've got all the different lighting, so bright light, warm light, and how much of an impact that can have. So if you're north facing, south facing in the room throughout the day as the sun changes, what advice would you give there to try and help people to get confidence in making decisions around their paint choices?
So lighting has such a huge impact on colour. I mean, there's absolutely no way you could, select a colour in a shop like that and kind of expect it to look the same in your home. So, the advice I always give people is to get some tester pots of the colour and to try these out in a number of places in a particular room. So not just on one wall, because the light from outside will hit each wall differently. And also then to look at these in the daylight, and then also at different times of the day. So, at that kind of twilight hour where you maybe have some lights on, and then, in proper darkness when you've got all your internal lights on and your curtains or blinds closed, and see how that colour changes, because you've got to like it sort of at all, times of the day if it is a room that you use around the clock. And, I'd say, I know sometimes people are a little bit hesitant maybe in putting loads of colour swatches on the wall when they're just at the beginning of that decision process. A thing I often do is just paint them onto like A4 sheets of paper, but paint a few in each colour you're considering. So again, you can just put them up with masking tape on your wall, on the several different walls. And then you can also move them round. It can be quite good to look at colour against, say, a sofa you've got in the room, or any other furniture that's kind of right up against the wall, and maybe artwork that you've got hanging on the wall. Pop a piece of this or paint a bit of the sample right up against, sort of going under the artwork on the wall, so you can really see how that kind of pops or, blends in with, or whatever it's going to do with the new colour that you're considering. And I would also say it's quite good to look at colour in the corner of the room, particularly if it's a kind of a darker shade, because when you get into the corners of your room, that's where the shade is even darker, the darkest it'll be in the room. So if it's 2 sheets of A4 paper, pop them together at right angles in that corner, and also maybe look at them up against the ceiling, so you get that contrast if you have a white ceiling and a deep colour, and just put it up there and live with that for a few days and just see how you like or dislike that kind of level of contrast in the room.
I think that's such a great idea. Now, one question I do have though is that, let's just say my grey walls and I decide that I'm going to paint them orange. Maybe not. It's very energetic apparently for offices.
Yes.
Should I paint a sample over the grey if that's what I'm going to do? Because will that change the shade of orange versus if I was painting it onto a white wall? So if I was painting it onto a sheet, will that give a difference?
Yeah. So when you look at colour against another colour, it will influence how you perceive that colour that you're trying to make the decision on. So that can influence you, positively or negatively, depending on what that colour combination is. So yeah, I would advise to have some white around it. So, that's probably easier if you're painting sheets of A4 paper, like I described, then have a bigger sheet or 2 sheets behind it of plain white paper, so that when you do pin it up on your wall, you can actually have have a sort of a white frame around it. Now, if you're painting straight onto the wall, obviously it's a bit more laborious to have to do white first and then your colour. But the other thing is, if you paint quite a large area of your tester colour, then your eye is less influenced by the colour around it, because you've got a bigger patch of that area to focus on.
So lots of potential for mistakes, but hopefully lots of advice there that you can avoid some of the more common ones. Any other tips, Audrey, as we look to close off the conversation around what people can do to minimise potential mistakes as they're designing their perfect home?
Yeah, so I think, just like leading on from that conversation about the paint samples, if you're doing that kind of process in your home, but you're also buying some furniture, see if you can get some samples of fabrics or woods or whatever else it is that you're considering to put in, and then look at those along with your paint samples to kind of give you an overall vision then of, what you're trying to build up in the room. And I'd also say, it's quite helpful to put some images like on a PowerPoint or a Word document or something for yourself of furniture items that you're considering, along with some of these paint colours or fabric patterns and things, and to allow yourself to just appreciate visually how these things are working together, and allowing yourself then to just kind of focus on that and make your decisions, rather than, I think often people are thinking about a lot of things in their head, but they're not really representing them visually. And it's also quite helpful then if you do need to sort of discuss or negotiate maybe with somebody else in the home as to what these decisions should be, and maybe neither party wants to take the responsibility for any kind of mistakes, that you've got a kind of a joint vision board then, if you like, of what you're building up to.
That all sounds very, very good advice. So hopefully people have found that useful, and you can avoid making the common mistakes in your home design.
If you enjoyed our podcast, we would be delighted if you could rate, review, and subscribe on your favourite podcast provider. This will help others who are seeking home and furnishing advice and inspiration discover the DNA of home interiors. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at the DNA of Home Interiors.
If you are looking for inspiration and help in designing your home interiors, take a look at Audrey Whelan's masterclasses on audreywhelan.com/events. And don't forget to check out youfurnish.com, a search and comparison website which helps connect people with amazing furniture from over 100 retailers. We designed it to solve the problem we and thousands like us faced furnishing our homes. And now we are really excited that everyone can search, discover, compare and shop for their home all in one place.
Thank you to our sponsor checkatrade.com for their support in bringing this episode to you. And most importantly, thank you all for listening today.
We hope you can join us next time.